In my last video critiquing Nintendo's latest actions, I made a couple of unconscious predictions, and I'm not surprised to say the least. Although Mario Kart World's physical and digital copies will cost the same amount of money in the US, they will have different prices in select regions. In Spain, for instance, the digital version of the game will set players back €80, which is equivalent to about $90. However, a physical copy of Mario Kart World will go for €90, or approximately $100 in US dollars. Companies have been trying to move away from the $60 gaming price tag for a very long time, and all Nintendo is doing here is setting a precedent for other companies to follow suit. Hello fellow travelers, and welcome to the Hard Light Network. Alrighty guys, we are finally back to creating new content with a brand new PC, and I thought that it would be good to stick to tradition and bash Nintendo. Considering that the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct happened while I was out of commission, I thought it would be a good idea to cover what for me is the biggest controversy to come out of the whole thing. In my last video critiquing Nintendo's latest actions, I made a couple of unconscious predictions, and I'm not surprised to say the least. But to be completely honest with you guys, it's not so much about having prophetic powers as it is about seeing where the train is going and what sort of decisions that's ultimately going to lead to. The bottom line and the main point of these videos is that these companies are increasingly bloated, greedy, and lazy, and the level to which they will exploit their customer base in order to support their business model hasn't even begun to show itself yet. However, the controversy around pricing is only the beginning, and we'll discuss more later in the video. However, if you can, do me a solid and hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the content that I've got coming up for you guys in the future, and also take to the comment section down below with your thoughts on this issue. Also, if you want to support this channel further, there are super thanks and memberships options down below. Be sure to join the channel today for access to exclusive content and perks that you can't get anywhere else. With that being said, let's get into today's article. Our first bit of reading comes to us today from Game Rant and is entitled, Nintendo Switch 2's game pricing is as confusing as it is controversial. Nintendo's upcoming console, the Nintendo Switch 2, will have an assortment of over 20 games available at launch, including some major first-party exclusives and popular third-party titles. This is not only double the number of titles that the original Switch released with, it's also one of the most stacked launch lineups in Nintendo hardware history. Normally, one would think that the reaction of the Switch 2's catalog of games would be incredibly positive, especially considering Nintendo's esteemed reputation in the console space. However, the reception from fans has been anything but. Despite running on what is effectively last-gen hardware, Nintendo has confirmed that some of the launch titles for the Switch 2 are going to be a lot more expensive than initially anticipated. The upcoming open-world kart racer Mario Kart World is going to cost an eye-watering $80 in the United States, making it more costly than any other modern AAA game on the market. Meanwhile, third-party titles such as the 2020 sci-fi first-person RPG Cyberpunk 2077 will be adopting a $70 price tag, similar to most big-budget releases on the PS5 and Xbox Series XS. The prices for many of these early Switch 2 titles have caused a lot of fan backlash, not only because of the bad precedent that they may set for future game releases, but also because they're just downright confusing. Mario Kart World is perhaps the perfect example of how odd the pricing strategy is for many Nintendo Switch 2 games. Although Mario Kart World's physical and digital copies will cost the same amount of money in the US, they will have different prices in select regions. In Spain, for instance, the digital version of the game will set players back €80, which is equivalent to about $90. However, a physical copy of Mario Kart World will go for €90, or approximately $100 in US dollars. Nintendo has almost never charged separate prices for digital and physical versions of games, so this decision seems like it'll cause a lot of headaches for consumers in the long run. Judging by Mario Kart World's pricing, some may assume that all Nintendo first-party exclusives will cost $80 from now on, but that isn't the case. The upcoming 3D action platformer Donkey Kong Bonanza will be released 1 month after the Switch 2 comes out, and it's going to cost $70, despite it also being a AAA Nintendo-published title. Weirdly enough, some older Nintendo Switch games that are getting enhanced re-releases for the Switch 2, known as Switch 2 editions, cost even more than the all-new Donkey Kong Bonanza. Nintendo announced that the upgraded Switch 2 editions of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom from 2023, Super Mario Party Jamboree 2024, and Kirby The Forgotten Land 2022 will all be priced at $80, just like Mario Kart World. The Nintendo Switch 2 edition of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2017, however, is, quote, only $70. This is still quite expensive for what is effectively a remaster of a Wii U game, but it's a bit unexpected that it's cheaper compared to the others. As if the situation wasn't confusing enough already, there are several Nintendo-published games that will receive Switch 2 patches with improved performance and resolution, but not Switch 2 editions. Since these patches will be free to all Switch 2 owners, they make the $70 to $80 price tags for the Switch 2 edition games look rather excessive. Granted, some Switch 2 editions, like the Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom ones, are going to be included at no extra cost to active Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack subscribers. But the fact that they cost so much money is still weird, especially considering they contain almost no new features compared to the games that are already getting free patches. Of course, for me and the others who are wise to the ways of these companies, there's nothing confusing or surprising in the least about it. If these companies could get away with charging $100, $200, or $300 for their titles, they would do it in a heartbeat. They've already flooded the internet space with rationalizations for these decisions, saying that it takes money to run these companies, and the cost of development has increased over the years. Companies have been trying to move away from the $60 gaming price tag for a very long time, and all Nintendo is doing here is setting a precedent for other companies to follow suit. And again, it's not a matter of prophecy to say that in a couple short years' time, we will see price tags like this from Sony and Microsoft as well. This is nothing more than the consequence of the bloat that these companies are experiencing, as well as their intentional push away from a physical medium to a digital one. However, what is genuinely surprising to me is that there are customers within their base who are not only willing to support these companies through these actions, but also defend them wholeheartedly. As we can actually read in this comment thread from No Life Degenerate, who starts by stating, "I welcome a difference in physical and digital pricing. They should have stopped coddling retailers ages ago. Time for physical to become a niche thing that it should be. No more pointless physical releases for games that require online servers and constant downloads anyway." To which Walt responds, "I agree that they shouldn't be the same. It's never made sense that I can buy Switch games cheaper physically than digitally." Followed up by Nicholas, who states, "They shouldn't be the same, but Nintendo is doing this all backwards. Digital editions should be made cheaper, $50 to $60, and physical should be $60 to $70, not $80 to $90. Raising the pricing of physical even further beyond the standard is just bad." However, it's actually my contention that both sides of this discussion are missing out on a key point. Of course, it logically follows that digital copies should be cheaper than physical copies, considering you don't have to account for manufacturing or distribution costs. However, before the age of online-only, server-dependent games, owning a physical copy of a game was about precisely that: owning the game. Moving away from physical media to digital media isn't about owning the retailers like No Life Degenerate wants to imply. Rather, it's more about publishers and developers maintaining control over these titles even after they've been purchased. If it was about going to war with physical retailers, then they would have simply stopped producing physical copies altogether without the need for price adjustments. But Nintendo has actually responded to this controversy in a much more direct way than they normally do when it comes to these issues. As we can read in this Vice article entitled, "Wait, Nintendo says there's a good reason you're paying $80 for Mario Kart World and those Switch 2 editions." Quote, "Whoa," the executives at Nintendo said following the anger online over the revelation that games for Nintendo Switch 2 could cost as much as $80. Quote, "We know you're upset, sensitive economic times and all, but hear us out. There's a reason you'll be paying that much for Mario Kart World and the special Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Tears of the Kingdom. Because our games are super mega cool, okay?" In an interview with IGN, Nintendo of America's Vice President of Product and Player Experience, Bill Trinan, spoke about the recent pricing controversies. Quote, "I would say it's less about the strategy of pricing Mario Kart World. It's more just whenever we look at a given game, we just look at what the experience is, and what's the content, and what's the value," Trinan emphasized. Later, Trinan would speak on Nintendo's strategy to price certain Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Switch titles at $70 to $80. I would say we just look at each individual game and the content and value of that game. And then we say, what's the right price for the value of this entertainment? Quote, what I would probably counter to some of that is really what you're looking at for the Nintendo Switch 2 edition. That's the physical price for somebody that has not bought the base game. For somebody who has bought Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild, the upgrade packs for those are $9.99. And if you happen to be a Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack member, both of the Zelda upgrade packs are inclusive with that membership, so there's no additional charge for those. But I think overall, our general approach is really just focus on what's the content, what's the value, and what's an appropriate price based on that. I mean, did anyone expect Nintendo to come out and say, quote, you know what, our games aren't worth that price actually. Plus, as with most similar controversies, I'll spoil how it's going to turn out in the end. Nintendo will drop Mario Kart World for $80. A few people might complain, sure, but overall, it'll likely be the best-selling title in the entire Mario Kart franchise. People acclimate to the new pricing standard, and then GTA 6 comes out, demands $100+, and the outrage cycle is reborn. And in all honesty, truer words have never been written, because it's really just as arbitrary as that. Nintendo is going to charge whatever they feel like they want to charge. It's not about costs associated with production, manufacturing, or distribution. It's not about sticking it to the retailers, and it certainly has nothing to do with how their customer base feels. It's ultimately down to what does Nintendo think this game is valued at. And honestly, I don't have a problem with that. Nintendo should charge whatever they feel like charging. What I do have a problem with, though, is that these communities continue to support these companies despite feeling taken advantage of. And just like the Vice article says, the outrage doesn't last that long, and the impulse to have the latest and greatest shiny new toy trumps any sort of sense of financial discipline that these people might have. Nintendo knows full well that there's always going to be kids begging their parents for the newest titles. They know full well that there's always a birthday or a holiday just around the corner to justify spending the money on a gift. They already know that enough people are going to sink the $80 necessary to play this game in order to justify this decision, and other companies are going to see this as a massive financial success. Truth be told, we could spend all day jumping up and down about how malicious and greedy these companies have gotten. However, it doesn't really matter because there are legions of people ready and willing to throw their money into this burning trash pit. Until the average consumer is willing to become more disciplined with their purchases, these problems are only going to get worse, and they're only going to matter to the minority of us. But as always, for me, the biggest problem isn't even about the pricing of these titles, but rather the loss of our ability to preserve them for the future. The shift away from games as a product to games as a service, as well as the constant delisting of older titles only to repackage them at full price at a later date, has already done damage to numerous titles across the industry. The legacy of many games is being actively overwritten in real time, and it seems like the majority of gamers simply don't care as long as they can have access to the newest Mario Kart. It's a truly sad state of affairs, but ultimately that's where we're going to end this video, guys. Thank you so much to everybody who has watched up to this point. If you like this video, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the content that I've got coming up for you guys in the future. Also, feel free to take to the comment section down below, even if you disagree with some of my takes in this video. At the end of the day, I don't think that we're going to lose gaming entirely, but it's clear to see that the massive, widespread changes across the board have been happening so frequently that the industry as a whole is transforming into something entirely different from where it began. The creation of AAA titles is no longer about pushing the boundaries of innovation or creativity and more about recreating financial success. And if the key to that financial success is bumping up the price tag, then these companies have no problem doing so. More responsibility is going to fall to gamers to make changes on our side of the industry if we want to see changes made that benefit us. But of course, we've got a lot more to cover, guys, so as always, thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, and until next time, love you guys, safe travels.